Hello everyone, and welcome to New Mode English. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to use narrative verbs in English language. First things first, what is narration? Narration is when you tell a story about something that happened in the past in English language. This is called narration. So narration is storytelling or giving the account of an event that happened in the past. This is called narration in English language. So, well, you need narrative verbs or certain grammatical structures which can help you tell the story in the past. Okay, without any further ado, let's start. The first verb tense that you can use in order to tell a story about something that happened in the past is past simple. We use the past simple to talk about past events in chronological order. We use the past simple to talk about past events in chronological order. What is chronological order? It is the order in which something happened, the order of time or time order in which something happened in the past. Chronological order shows the sequence of events, which event happened first, which happened next, which one happened third, and stuff like this. So the sequence, the chronological order, time sequence is called chronological order. So let me give you some examples. When she opened a door, she pretended we weren't there and she went to her room. Okay, you see the time sequence? When she opened a door, she pretended we weren't there and she went to her room. He called me and asked me to pick him up, but he wasn't there when I arrived. You see the time sequence. So first, she called me. She asked me to pick him up. When I arrived there, she wasn't there. You see time sequence, the time order in which something or certain actions happen in the past. We can also use simple past. We also use the past simple to talk about past habits or past states. For example, we often went to the bar for a drink before dinner. We often went to the bar for a drink before dinner. He really liked sport and was very fit. You see? So we can also use simple past to talk about past habits or to talk about past states in English language. In our storytelling, sometimes we need to talk about habits. We need to just talk about states in the past, states that existed in the past, so we can easily use simple past. Okay, so let me just read this part again. We use past simple, okay? We use past simple to talk about past events in chronological order, time order, okay? So the next verb tense that we can use in order to just give the account of an event or tell the story, okay, in the past is past continuous. We use the past continuous to set the scene in a story. So let me just make it simple for you, everyone. We can use past continuous to create a background to our story. Okay, the background is the scene in which something happened, in which the main event happened. So we can create a scene, we can create a background using past continuous, and in that background, in that scene, the main event happens. Okay, so past continuous can be used for creating a scene about our story, creating a background to our story. Okay, so let me give you some examples. Last night I was walking home and listening to my iPod when, so you see, everyone, in the background, I was just walking home, I was listening to my iPod when, and after when, the main event happens. Probably, for example, when I saw my friend, when I bumped into a friend of mine. Okay, so you see, in the background, in the scene is like this. It was last night, it was, night, and I was walking home. I was listening to my iPod. This is the scene. This is the background. Okay, so the background was happening, and then the main event actually took place, which was like, for example, when I saw my friend, when I bumped into my friend. Okay, Another example. The sun was shining and lots of tourists were lying on the beach. Suddenly, you see the scene, everybody? You see the background? The sun was shining, lots of tourists were lying on the beach, okay? It is the scene, it is the background, okay? And in this background, in this scene to our story, the main event happened suddenly. For example, I don't know, somebody was attacked by, for example, a shark. Okay. So you see the background, the background. So we use past continuous to create a background, to create a scene, set a scene, okay, in our story. So by using simple past, we can talk about the main events in chronological order, time order. By using past continuous, in time conjunction with simple past, of course, we can talk about the main event, okay? So, I mean, a scene and a main event. So we use the past continuous for actions in progress in the past or longer actions interrupted by shorter actions in the past. I mean, creating the scene or and then the events which interrupt that scene. Okay, for example, after dinner, I went into my living room and saw that she was crying. When she opened the door, we were talking about her. Okay, or for example, the scene, I was walking home, I was walking back home, walking back home, and for example, looking at the stars in the sky, comma, when, for example, my friend called, you see. So in the background, you see, I'm using simple past in time conjunction with past continuous. So the scene is like this: I was walking, it is the scene, it is the background, looking at the stars, okay, in the background into my story, the scene of my story, and then there's an interruption when my friend called. So for the interruption, okay, the main event, we use simple past. Okay, for the background or for the scene, we use past continuous. So if we use past continuous in time connection, time conjunction with simple past, we can easily give the account of events that happen in the past. Okay, let's move on. The next verb tense that we can use is past perfect simple. Past perfect simple can be used in storytelling, especially when we want to flash back in our story, when we want to refer to something that happened, okay, before another event in the past, okay? Flashback. Let me just read this part first. We use the past perfect simple to talk about an earlier past event, okay? Flashback, earlier past event that happened before the main event. Okay, so let me just put it in. If I can, I don't know. Let me just put it on a kind of timeline. Okay, imagine this is my timeline. Okay, that I am just drawing. This is my timeline, everybody. So, so we have a main event here, main event here in my timeline. Okay, like for example, I saw my friend or my father or for example, I came back home. I arrived home. Okay. So this is my main event. Okay. Now, I don't want to talk about this main event because main event can be expressed using simple past. I want to flash back in my story. I want to talk about earlier past. So for earlier past, we should use past perfect, simple past, perfect, simple. Okay. Or, earlier past. Okay. So you see past perfect simple for the background, sorry, for the flashback, and then we have the main event here. Let me give you an example, okay? By the time I graduated, comma, I had already found a job. You see? So I graduated is the main event. So let me just switch the clauses, sorry. Uh, I had already, I mean, it is more clear if I just use it first, use the, the main clause first. I had already graduated. Sorry, I had already found a job, comma, by the time I graduated. So as we can see, everybody, we have I had already found the job in the flashback, okay, and then we have the main event. I graduated, okay. So you see, flashback, talking about an earlier event, okay. I had already graduated earlier when I had already found a job earlier when I graduated. Let me give you another example. Um, uh, when I left home, uh, when I left home, comma, I realized that I had forgotten to lock the door. Lock the door. You see, in the flashback, I had forgotten, to lock the door. Okay, earlier events. Okay, before the main event. So see, I want to flashback. So the main events are like this. I left home, I realized these are the main events, okay? But in the flashback, I had forgotten to lock the door. Before all these things, before I left home, before I realized that everything, before all these things, I had forgotten to lock the door. You see, in the flashback, okay? So an earlier past event. So, and let me just read this part again. We use the past perfect simple to talk about an earlier past, events that happened before the main event in the past. Earlier single event, we use the past perfect simple to talk about earlier event and experiences or single action completed earlier in the past. We have too many examples here that we can read. When she opened the door, he had already left. I realized that I had been there before. When I met her, I had never been in a serious relationship. He noticed I had cleaned the car. It was smooth and shiny. He noticed that I had cleaned the car. It was smooth and shiny. In the, in a flashback, I had cleaned the car. Before all these things, I had cleaned the car. We also use the past perfect simple and not, the continuous version, because past perfect also has a continuous version. But now I'm just talking about the simple version of past perfect. We can also use past perfect simple to say how much or how many we had done of something earlier in the past. Very important key point I can say here about past perfect. We can talk about how much or how many we had done of something earlier in the past. So let me just read this sentence again. We also use past perfect simple to say how much or how many we had done of something earlier in the past. Let me give you two, beautiful examples here. We had driven 500 miles and we needed some rest. So we had driven 500 miles. How many hours had he spent when when you woke him up? Okay. How many hours had he slept when you woke him? So the next point is about using about past perfect is duration from earlier in the past or stative with the stative verbs, of course. Duration from earlier in the past, stative verbs. First things first, I have to tell you that stative verbs are the verbs which cannot be used with ing. They refer to a state of your mind. Okay, they are somehow the opposite of action verbs in English language, because some verbs are actions such as eat, drink, I don't know, jump, run. These are action verbs. Stative verbs are the verbs which do not refer to an action in English language. They refer to a state. Okay, we call them stative verbs, and we should use stative verbs with past perfect simple, not the continuous version, because they don't take ing anyhow. So anyway, stative verbs are verbs such as, for example, like, love, hate. When you like something, you don't do anything. It is a state of your mind that you love something, you like something, you hate something. When you understand something, you don't do anything. It is in your brain, okay? In your mind that you understand something. So these are stative verbs. because they refer to a state of your mind. That's why we call them stative verbs. Remember, again, I repeat, stative verbs cannot take ing, and they are rarely or never used in continuous verb tenses in English language. We cannot use them with present continuous. We cannot use them in past continuous, past perfect continuous, future continuous. Stative verbs do not take ing, therefore we cannot use them in continuous, verb tenses. We use the past perfect simple. I told you we need a simple version with stative verbs. We use the past perfect simple with the stative verbs to talk about states or situations that had started earlier in the past. We often use how long, for, since, always, etc. So we use the past perfect simple with the stative verbs to talk about states or situations that had started early in the past. We often use how long, for, since, always, and these kind of adverbs. So you see, to talk about state, okay, that had started earlier. Again, because it is past perfect, it had started earlier. But this time we are talking about a state, not an action. We're talking about a state in English language by using stative verbs. Let me give you some examples. The day Anne died, they had been married for 48 years. The day Anne died, they had been married for 48 years. You see, it is a state. Had been married, a state of being married, not being single. The day I left, I had been in England for exactly 4 years. Huh? I had been in England. Huh? State of being in one place. Huh? And as you can see, we are using adverb, the preposition for, adverbs always, since, and stuff. She told me she had always hated her sister. She told me that she had always hated her sister, always, okay? Hated her sister. So let's move on to the next point. Another verb tense that can be very useful when you're telling a story about the past is to use past perfect continuous. Past perfect continuous is the continuous version of past perfect because we also have past perfect, as I mentioned, earlier. But this time I want to talk about past perfect continuous. We can use past perfect continuous to talk about duration from earlier in the past, but we use it with dynamic verbs, with action verbs, because action verbs such as jump, run, eat, these kind of verbs can take ing, and past perfect continuous can easily do the job of showing the duration from an earlier in the past. So let me read this very important sentence. We use the past perfect continuous with dynamic verbs or action verbs, not state, to talk about longer continuous actions that started early in the past than the main event of the story. So let me just read this again. We use past perfect continuous with dynamic verbs to talk about longer continuous actions that started in the past than the main event of the story. Simply put, or to tell this to you very simply, we can show the duration of an action verb or a dynamic verb before another action in the past. So using past perfect continuous, we can show the duration of an earlier event in the past. Let me repeat my sentence again. Using past perfect continuous, we can show the duration of an earlier event in the past. Let me give you some examples. I was very angry. I had been waiting for him in the cold and he didn't call to say he'd be late. So I had been waiting at the duration of something that was happening, okay, before the main action didn't call, okay? We had been driving for less than an hour when a car broke down. You see the duration of an event, okay, for less than an hour. So we had been driving for less than an hour shows the duration of a continuous action before the main action, before the car broke down. So again, I repeat, we can use past perfect continuous to talk about the duration of an event in an earlier past time, okay, or earlier than the main event. The next point is that we can also use past perfect continuous to talk about repeated actions, okay, from earlier in the past. Again, we can use that. We have to use dynamic verbs because stative verbs do not take ing, but we can use dynamic or action verbs with ing. So we can use past perfect continuous to talk about repeated past actions from an earlier past. So we use the past perfect continuous with dynamic verbs to talk about repeated actions in earlier in the past. Okay, for example, I couldn't believe it. She had been writing a letter every day for over a year. Okay, so she had been writing a letter, a repeated past action, huh, for over a year. So let's continue with the next part. Another very important grammatical structure that we can use to talk about, to tell a story, okay, about the past is to use used to plus infinitive. Probably you are familiar with this specific grammar, used to plus infinitive. We can use used to plus infinitive. What I mean by infinitive is infinitive without to, of course. I mean a simple form of the verb or base form of the verb, or it is also called bare infinitive, means infinitive without to. So we can use to plus infinitive or plus simple verb to talk about, again, repeated actions in the past. Another way of talking about repeated past events or repeated past actions is to use used to plus an infinitive. Be careful with the pronunciation, used to, huh? So we can use used to plus infinitive to talk about things that we did repeatedly in the past. We can use used to plus infinitive to talk about things that we did repeatedly in the past. Let me give you some examples. When I was a child, I used to go skiing every winter. Okay? When I was a child, I used to go skiing every winter. Okay? So I used to go, I used to go repeatedly, huh? From the age of 12 till I was 16, I used to dance at weekends. Every weekend I used to dance, huh? Repeatedly. I didn't used to smoke before I got this job. So we can also use used to talk about situations or states that no longer true. Okay, remember, situations or states that are no longer true. Something that was true in the past or state that existed in the past, but now it doesn't exist anymore. We can use used to plus infinitive to talk about situations or stative verbs, of course, which were true in the past but are no longer true. Okay, so we can also use, used to with stative verbs. Let me just make it, more simple. We can use used to with action verbs, both with action verbs and state verbs. When we use, used to with action verbs, it refers to a repeated actions in the past. When we use it with state verbs, it refers to situations or states that are no longer true. We can use used to plus infinitive or simple form of the verb to talk about situations or state which were true in the past but are no longer true. Remember, whenever you use used to, the state or that state or situation does not exist in the present anymore. It is all about the past. Let me give you some examples. As a child, I used to be blonde. Means I'm not blonde anymore. But this state, the state of being blonde was true for me in the past, but not now anymore. I used to live with my mom when I was a child, huh? It was the state that existed in the past, but not now. Now I do not live with my mom anymore, but I used to live with my mom in the past. So you see, beautiful use of used to. We can use used to tell a story about the past, okay? Give the account of events in the past. Another verb that we can use in order to, tell a story about the past, in order to narrate or in order to give the account of past events, is to use would plus infinitive. Again, it is infinitive without to, the base form of the verb, the simplest version of the verb, a verb without ing, without to, without ed, nothing, just the simple form of the verb, the base form of the verb. And you know that after all modal verbs, they have to use infinitive, base form of the verb. And would is no exception, of course. We can use would to talk about repeated actions in the past. We use would with action verbs. Everyone, again, I repeat, we use would only with action verbs. We cannot use would with state verbs. We only use would with action verbs. We can use would plus infinitive to talk about things that we repeatedly did in the past because it is action. It is about repetition of the event. And we can use would. So we can use would plus infinitive to talk about things that we repeatedly did in the past. Let me give you some examples. Every Saturday, we would go to the shopping center with my parents. Okay. We would go means repeatedly. We went every Saturday. Okay. Every Saturday in the past, we would go. So repeated actions in the past. My fifth grade teacher would tell me to shut up at the beginning of every class. Oh my God. What a bad example it is. And what a bad, of course, behavior by a teacher. But anyhow, it is just an example. And would tell me means repeatedly. He told me to shut up at the beginning of every class. So we can use would plus action verbs, simple, action verbs, in order to talk about repeated actions. Then again, I repeat, do not use would with state. We can use used to with action verbs or repeated actions in the past, or with the state verbs to talk about situations that are no longer true, but would can only be used with action verbs to talk about repeated past actions. Do not use would with state verbs. Situations that are no longer true, we cannot use would. As I told you, we cannot, everybody, use would to talk about situations or stative verbs which are no longer true. I would be blonde as a child is completely wrong because being blonde is a state, it is not an action, and would cannot be used with stative verbs. Instead of would, we have to use used to. As I mentioned earlier, we can use used to with both state and action verbs, but we use would only with action verbs to talk about repeated past action. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for your patience, of course. Let me go back to the drawing board and start over, just have a brief review over what I've already told you, and then I can wrap up the grammar and finish the video. So the whole story was about using narrative verbs in English language to tell stories in the past or to give the account of events in the past. We can use simple past to talk about main events in chronological order, to talk about main events in time order. And it is one of the most important verb tenses that we can use. There are some examples here that you can recheck, everybody. Past continuous can be very helpful if you want to create a scene, if you want to create a background, if you want to create a scene for the main events. Okay, so we can create a beautiful scene, an ugly scene, whatever the scene that you like, or a background for your main events of the story. Okay, using past continuous. Let me just read one example of each. When she opened a door, she pretended we weren't there, and she went to her room. Okay, past continuous for background events. Last night I was walking home and listening to my iPod when, for example, I saw my friend, the main event. We can also use past perfect simple to talk about to use flashback. Flashback, um, capability in our, storytelling. We can use this ability, to use flashback in our stories by using past perfect. Past perfect always happens before the main event. Remember, the main event is in simple past. So by using simple past in time conjunctions, time connection with past perfect, we can create many beautiful sentences which has a flashback in them. Okay, flashback to the earlier event in the past. Like the example I gave you, I had already found a job by the time I graduated. It is my main event. I graduated, but in the in the flashback, I had already found a job. Uh, Okay, and I told you that we can use past perfect, simple, okay, with stative verbs as well. Okay. Also, we can use past perfect continuous. Past perfect continuous can be used with dynamic verbs only because we need ing verbs, verbs that can take ing, and state verbs cannot take ing. So we have to use action verbs. We can use past perfect with action verbs to talk about duration of an event before the main event in the past. So past perfect continuous refers to the duration of an event before the main event. I was very angry and I had been waiting for him the duration, before the main event, and he didn't call. We had been driving for less than an hour, duration of an event before the main event when the car broke down. Very clear example it is, everybody. You can easily understand how to use past perfect continuous. Use past perfect continuous for duration of an event, and that's it. So we can use used to talk about repeated past actions. Okay, if you use used to with action verbs, it refers to repeated past actions. If you use used to with state verbs means like love, be, like, this kind of state that I told you, like I used to like, I used to be, I used to leave. These are, I mean, state verbs, and stative verbs. We can refer to states that are no longer true. Finally, we can use would in our storytelling to talk about only actions or repeated past actions in the past. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for tuning in into this video. You have to make more examples with every part of this video. At home, you need to practice, and practice makes perfect. Make sure to try to write some stories in the past about something that happened to you in the past, like, for example, a trip that you took to, I don't know, a tourist destination, or the account of something that happened to you when you were a teenager. I don't know, something. Try to write a story, and in that one story that you are writing, make sure to use different grammatical structure that I taught you in this video. So by trying to write different stories or tell different stories, writing them is easier, of course, at the beginning, by trying to write different stories about something that happened to you in the past, like, the trip that you took, something special that happened to you when you were a teenager, or a sad event in the past, I don't know. And by trying to use these grammatical structures, incorporating them and using them in your story, you can easily learn how to use different beautiful grammatical structures for narration, and you will learn how to use narrative verbs in English language. How to use narrative verbs in English language. Again, thank you very much, and good luck and goodbye.